This is part 2 of our custom two-factor authentication build. In this video we're going to be looking at what we've done in Supabase and Flutterflow to enhance the security of what we did in the first video. Right, so if you haven't yet watched video 1, you can come and watch it. There'll be a link somewhere on the screen. You can go back and watch it, where we build a nominally functional two-factor authentication system in Flutterflow and Supabase without really taking too much regard to the security of it. Now, I've spent a bit of time looking into this and I've done some things. Now, if you are a database security expert, firstly, I would love to hear from you and just to in the comments see what you think of this. And also, if you're not paid your weight in gold, then the world is out of balance, because this is just a rabbit hole that keeps getting deeper and deeper, and sometimes I don't know where to stop. So I would think I've done what is probably you would consider minimally required. So let's take a dive in, see what I have done, and like I say, love to hear from you in the comments what you think, and let's go have a look. Right, so what have we done? Starting on the authentication page, this is the status page. This is where you land when you turn up to the site. And what we've done, we've got the widgets in a form widget, so we can do the validation of the field. So we have got text field and the PIN code, and then in terms of validation, we're just checking that it's a valid email address that somebody's putting in. I did think about doing a maximum allowed characters, which I probably would do, and then basically the error message is just that it's a required field and it's a valid PIN code. That's all we're doing on that one. And then on the custom actions, when you click the submit button, we're doing the validate form there. So that's the first thing we're doing, and we do that on all the forms. We've now got some kind of form validation on them. Every box that you put in, whether you're logged in or not, they've all got the form validation on. So that's the first thing I did. And then the next thing I did was combine a couple of functions and trying to query the users table only once. So on the custom actions for the submit button, what we're doing, we've now got a new custom action called set user ID, which we didn't have before, and then that checks the two-factor authentication. So what we're doing is set user ID. We're going into Supabase, we're going into the users table, we're getting their UUID. We are then querying the verify table to get the table number, basically the record number, and that's what we're returning back to Flutterflow to check if they're enrolled or not. And I'm doing this simply because so we're sending basically as little personal information as possible across the internet. So only using the email address once, and we're just using random numbers essentially. So that's what I did there, and I'll go on to the Supabase side in just a second. And then same again, if they're enrolled, again you can go and watch the previous video, this will make more sense to you. If they're enrolled in two-factor authentication, basically nothing particularly happens, because then what happens is we get, if the status is true, that's when this comes up, because it is a conditional. Whether it's, if status is true, then it comes up as conditional, and they get the code, and then if it's false, they go straight to login. So we've done that, and as you can see there, we've put a limit on the code. So we've put on all the codes, both on this side and on the logged in side, when you opt into 2FA, we've done that so the codes all expire in 2 minutes. Again, all done. All this has been done on Supabase side, so I'll come to that in a second. So now on the custom action side, we have, this is a set user ID. We're returning an integer, putting in the user's email address is what we're sending to Supabase to check, and then we're calling the set user ID function in Supabase and returning an integer, as I said. And then the check TFA function that we've just looked at, that is the same as it was before. The only thing is different, we are sending back an integer and not the email address, or the email address we were sending previously. Sending back just an integer, which is the response from the previous function that we've just had on the screen. So that's how we're doing it. And then on the Supabase side, for this particular set of functions, this is the set user ID function. That's where we're sending the email to, which we're doing once. And this runs as a security definer function. Now, what that means is, because we're not logged in, we have to do that because it operates with the privileges of the person that created the function, not the user that invokes the function, because that's an anonymous user. So that bypasses all low level security, etc., etc. So that's why we have to be careful with using them. And when I said at the end of the previous video that maybe I'd been a bit too liberal with using them because it made my life easier, I think I had. So I've only used them where absolutely necessary, which you'll see as we go through. So what we're doing here, this is where we send the email, and we are sending that to the users table. And what we're doing, we are getting a derived view. So essentially this function is only viewing the email and the user ID from the users table. It's not viewing the whole table. And then we are pulling out of that the user ID that relates to the email from public users. So if we go over to the users table, we've got other information in there. We've got, apart from just the email address and the user ID, which is what we're using within the function, we're just pulling those two bits of information out. We've also got, first name, last name. We've got maybe the organisation they work for, their role, and we've also got phone numbers in there and that kind of stuff. So we don't want to expose any of that at all, unless at all possible. And we don't want to expose any of it unless we absolutely have to, should I say, sorry. And none of it if at all possible. So it's the path of least privilege, I think the expression is, and that's what we're trying to do. So back here, so we're running that security definer function, and we have set, again, look in the docs, it tells you must set a search path with pg temp, postgres temp last, which is what we've done. And then public first. So we're looking in the public schema first to get our information, so it shouldn't even get into the pg temp because it does everything. It'll find everything it needs in there. So that's what we've done there. And then we are set a session variable, which is the user ID. Now what that does, it'll remember the user ID in that variable for the next function. That, unfortunately, because it's there is no session, the user is not logged in. Once these functions are completed, the session variable will then become null, so you can't then use it for the next set of functions. It has to, unless you link the functions all together, then it remember them. But what I've found is, if as soon as its set of functions is completed, it will be forgotten what that session ID is, the session variable is rather, because it's anonymous user without a session. So what we're doing in this function, all we're doing essentially is going to the users table, getting the user's UID based on their email. We are limiting the information the function can search within and look at to do that, and we're putting it into a session variable. That's basically what we're doing. And then also at the end of that function, we are calling the next function, which is the ID function. So we'll go on to that now. Right, so this is the ID function. Again, it's security definer, and we've set the search path, and we are using the session variable that we set up in the previous function. So what we've done, we've passed that session variable onto this function, and what we're doing, we are returning back to Flutterflow the table ID of that user. So that is here. We're returning basically that table ID, and that will then determine if they are opted in or not, and also we'll be using that to get the code and the expiration timestamp and everything else. So basically what we're doing, when we click the submit button, all we're doing is sending the email address to Supabase, and we are returning a integer, which is this number, from the verified table, which is where we're doing the whether opt-in and doing the codes, as you remember from the previous video. And that's all we're doing, and then that in turn will then be used in the check two-factor authentication. So we've returned the user ID, which we can also use in the verification of the code, hence why I did it that way. So we're not, again, so we're only sending to and from Supabase with the security definer functions just an integer. We're not using email addresses apart from just the first one. And on the TFA, it comes back true or false, and then that's when we generate the code. So that's what we're doing in the first instance. So what we've done on the Supabase side, when we are calling the check two-factor authentication function, we've actually combined the generating the code and the checking if somebody is opted or not. So if they're opted in true, that will then generate the code in the same function based on the integer that we've sent, and if it's false, it will just go straight to the login page. So the check TFA and generate code. So this is now the check TFA function. Again, it's security definer. Again, we've set the search path, and we are passing in the table ID. So the table ID that we've just retrieved in the verified table, which is this one, that's what we're passing into this function. And essentially, if the user is logged in, if the user is opted in, it will generate the number and put it in their code, and it expires in the current timestamp plus 2 minutes. And then if they are not opted in, it will return false, and that's nothing there to do. So essentially, if they're opted in, we generate the code, we put the code in the table for its temporary position as we explained in the previous video, and we also put in a timestamp, which is current timestamp plus 2 minutes, into the verified table, and that again is a security definer function with a search path, and we're passing into it for checking which user we're dealing with, the table ID, not the email address like we were previously. That's what I've done. And then when you click the verify button, essentially you put in the code, confirm code. We're just calling in another custom action, calling the confirm code function in Supabase, which we'll come to in a second. Again, doing the form validation on the pin code, and we're sending the pin code and the table ID again back to Supabase to check. So confirm code. So essentially, we're putting in the code and the table ID, still a security definer function. We've got the search path set to public and then temp, and we are essentially going into the verified table, and we're looking for the table ID and the code, and that the expiration timestamp is greater than current timestamp. So essentially, if your current timestamp it's after the 2 minutes, it'll just come back with an error because the code has expired. So, and that's how we're doing it. So we are checking the code against the users, row in the table, and the timestamp. So if it's beyond the 2 minutes, it won't work, and if it's within 2 minutes, it will. So that's what we've done for the users when they log in. And then what we'll do now, we'll go and have a look at what we've done on the logged in side when people come to the site and they're a logged in user and they opt in to two-factor authentication. Right, so here we are back in Flutterflow. So what have we done for a user that's logged in and wants to opt in to two-factor authentication? So if you remember from the previous video, you toggle the switch and you will then be asked to create your phone number, and then you get a code to confirm it, and then you are enrolled. So basically same as the other form before you've logged in. We've got the form validation on, and basically I have set the phone number to have a maximum number of characters, which I did 12, which I believe, well, that's what we have in the UK. We have 12 characters for a phone number. I think it's less than that in the US, which is why I went for 12. It may be more in other parts of the world. Bit of research would have to go into that, obviously, to make sure that you were covering off everything you wanted. Interestingly, whether it was a problem with the way I did it or the problem with Flutterflow, but I couldn't get the custom regex to work. I thought I did it correctly in the way I know how to do it, and I looked at a few resources, and every time I did it, it broke. So that's something I would look into, you'd probably want it on there. But again, that was one of the things I was looking at doing and thinking about. So when you click on the submit button, basically what we're doing, got some custom actions, and essentially what we're doing is the same actions as what we're doing for the previous section. So if you're, before you've logged in, what we do is send the email to Supabase, and then we return the table ID, so we don't have to keep sending emails about the internet. So here we're just using the user ID because we have access to it with being a logged in user, obviously, which I'm sure everybody knows. Authenticate user ID. So get your auth code and then send SMS. That is the custom function to obviously send the SMS, which we're not doing now in this video. I think the API is a video on its own with a decent GitHub project and everything else, because I've done it using Postgres HTTP, and which I've used before for emails. So I think that is a subject on its own, and I'm going to go into it separately. So look out for that one coming. But yeah, basically that's what you do. Trigger these functions, send in the user ID. So Supabase side hasn't really changed that much here. So if you go, for instance, get auth code, we've got the get auth code, and we are just triggering that function in Supabase, and that would be, we'll come back to RLS in a minute, because that's really what this is all about. Access code, post authentication, and that's just putting the timestamp and the code once again in the verify table. So that's what you do on the verify phone page when you submit the button. Then that navigates you to the confirm phone, where you got your pin code, you get your countdown timer. So your code will expire in 2 minutes based on the current timestamp plus 2 minutes, and then once those 2 minutes are up, it will no longer use that code. It basically, because you've gone past the timestamp, and when it comes with an error, it just nulls it. So that's basically all we've done. Saying that with the submit, again, we're doing the confirming if the code is active, and if it comes, we're confirming if the code is correct. If it's true, we're changing the status of the person to opted in, and then just carry on. And if not, it navigates back to users with it still being false. So again, we're doing all this by sending user ID. So really, on the logged in side, we haven't done that much, because what we've done is we've done the form validation. The regex does need checking and looking into to make sure you can get it to function for the phone number type. The max length of the phone number is obviously 1, so it has to be a certain length. And then we've made sure that all of the functions on Supabase security invoker, there's no security defined. So we'll go to that now, because really most of what we've done on this side of it is on Supabase. So let's go over there now and have a look what we've done. So basically, if we go into functions and look at the security side in this column, most of them are invokers. The only ones we're using are definers, are for when we are not logged in. So that was the check TFA one, the confirm pin, getting the user ID to send back to the table, from the table to send back to Flutterflow, and then the sending the SMS one, which we haven't looked at yet, and then we've got a test there for SMS to J. We've got a couple of test ones, and then updating the users table. So with the trigger function, so obviously when we create a new user, the trigger function updates the users table. The only definer ones are for in terms of the 2FA are the ones on the pre-login. Everything else is a security invoker. So what that means is that will run with the permissions of the user that is running the function, not the user that created the function, which is what definer does. So definer bypasses all of the row level security and does what it needs to do, but invoker has to follow the rules for that particular user. So on the tables, then this is really the two biggest things that have really done on this side of it is the 2 minutes for the code, and that's all done in Supabase with the timestamp, and we have put some RLS policies in place. So on row level security, so what we've done, when you enable row level security in Supabase, the default position is that no access is available to the table for a user. So if you have got RLS enabled on a table with no policies, then that table will not be able to be added to, deleted from, updated, or you won't be able to select, or none of those commands will work because there's no policies to allow the user to do anything. So if you add a policy and it says, okay, this user can do this, that, and the other, that's what I've done. So I've only done it on select and update. So if you notice, there's no insert and there's no delete. So if we go new policy and we'll go get started quickly, and we'll just click on one of these now because then we'll get the user's template. So you can do it for all, you can do it for delete, update, insert, and select. So I have only done policies for select and update because the user will be selecting information from the table and they will be updating information within the table. So that means when the code is being written to the table, the pin code, when they're changing their 2FA status from true to false or false to true, that's an update, and writing the timestamp into the table, that's an update. And in terms of select, when we are taking information from it and sending it back to Supabase to be checked and verified with the functions, that's all part of select. So there is no reason for a user to insert or delete into the users table or the verified table, because all that is being done automatically when they sign up. So when a user signs up, the trigger function, we'll cancel that. The trigger functions when they sign up, which is update public users, that is basically run on a trigger, and what that does, that updates the verified table and the user table with their email address and their user ID, which I've shown you before. So basically we're inserting the user ID and the email address into the public user table, and in the verified table we're just inserting the ID. So there is no reason for a user to be able to insert or delete from the table, so therefore there's no need to have them given access to it. So, and what we've got in the policies for this is basically purely based on user ID. So where the user ID column in the table equals the authenticated user's UID, they'll be able to update that row of the table, and likewise where the user ID in the table equals the authenticated UID, they'll be able to select. I say there's no reason for them to do anything beyond select and update, and it's exactly the same ones. That's the users table, it's exactly the same on the verified table. That basically that works, and that is really the biggest thing I've done on the security side for the logged in users. It doesn't work obviously for somebody who's not logged in because they're in a non-user, anonymous user, so it can't really work for that. That's why we have to use security definer, which I'd say I'm a bit nervous about, but whether I go on to use this or not, I don't know. So that's basically what I've done, and really that's it. So a bit of a fly through really of what I have done on security side. Like I said, if you are an expert in this stuff, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, because I think so. Like I said at the beginning, I think what I've probably done is what's minimally required. I'm sure you can do a lot more. So yeah, I'd love to know how that looks. It's certainly a lot more secure than when I built it a few weeks ago, because I hadn't even really considered the security of it. So and I've learned a lot in the process, which is obviously very important. So yes, hopefully that helps. Hopefully there's stuff there you can take away for your own projects. And any questions in the comments, I'll try to get them answered, and I'll speak to you next time.